Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ein herzliches Willkommen hier aus Redmond in wunderschönen Washington State zur heutigen Anwendungsprogramm Schnittstellen Acceptance Committee Besprechung, die wir natürlich wie immer live mit Hilfe modernsten Übermittlungstechnologien in das weltweite Netz übertragen werden. In der heutigen Episode geht es unter anderem um das gute, alte, bewährte Ereignissystem, das wir in der Laufzeit von .NET schon seit Beginn und unverändert an Bord haben. Und wir werden besprechen, ob und inwiefern diese Vorgehensweise noch zeitgemäß und... Yeah, I'm losing it now.
It
Thank
was
you.
fantastic, though.
Thank you for the script, Klaus. All right. Yeah, we have a significant scroll bar today, and half my screen's red. Um, well, let's see if we can solve that. The German says we're going to be challenging an old rule. I mean, it didn't actually say that, but today we will be challenging an old guideline, and we'll see if it stands up or if we're throwing out a guideline today. But that'll be a little bit later when we have a few more people. And oh, I'm double cameraing it right now, which is bonkers because my head's turned in different directions. So I'll fix that. Bye bye double camera. Okay. Sorry for anyone who felt nauseous or nauseated. All right. First up, add iasync drop target to allow consuming async capable drops. This is WinForms issue 13422. Erkuni.
So this has come up from some of our bigger customers. There's this shows up in Outlook in particular because like the new Outlook is actually running on the is web based and ends up that the underlying engine does not support drag and drop of files without using the new. Use new very liberally. This interface was introduced many years ago. The async method. It's not async drop target, but like I mentioned it in here. It's anyway. We don't have a way to get at it, and there's no easy way for people to do this outside of like writing, OLE code from scratch. So, as a way to handle this, the idea is that you just put an interface on your control that says you want to accept these drops off of the main thread, and then we just handle that for you. We spin up the thread to give it to you. The user experience is such that when you drag it from, like if you drag a mail from New Outlook, right, to something that accepts a drop, right now you get nothing because it will not give it to you through the normal iDrop target stuff. And it requires that you actually tell it that you want it async. So you get nothing. And now I could hack that in. The reason they do that is because it's considered a download now from the internet, so you get prompted for that, and that's a kind of a terrible experience on your UI thread, so you block. So this is just a very simple thing that fits in the same pattern that unblocks this for folks.
Wait, so you're saying the reason the existing events don't get called for this scenario is it would lock up the UI thread?
No, like I could hack in the ability to get it. The existing ones don't get called at all because it's the underlying engine for Edge, right? The Chromium stuff, and Chromium will not let you get data unless you tell it that you are going to take it async. So while I could do that on the existing stuff and kind of hack in that functionality to get something, it would block the UI thread until you like accept or reject the dialogue in the other app, in the Outlook app, right? So it works. It's unpleasant. And I will actually have that hack in there now for folks. But if they want an experience that works better, it'll be over and you just implement this interface on your control.
Yeah, we talked about that. It could even be like a breaking change if we did it not in an async way.
Yeah, and I investigated like firing back on a different thread for the other one, but that's just sort of terrible. Even if you opt into it, right? Because there's all sorts of virtuals involved, and you know it fall over really quickly, right? So this is being very explicit that you want something to come back on a different thread.
Yeah, I never written Informs app, so take this with a massive grain of salt. But like,
Sure.
you know, if I were like writing an iDrop target, I would worry that like I wouldn't know this iasync drop target exists as like a new Informs developer, like, and I would just be wondering why my on drag drop thing wasn't firing. Like, will it be obvious that you should implement this async thing? It has the same stuff.
We'll just have to give documentation for it, because like we have no idea who's actually providing that information, right? So there's nothing like it looks like a normal drag drop, except when you try to go get the data off of the COM interface, it just fails. So unfortunately, there's no way to programmatically tell people that, right?
But I mean,
because there's lots and lots and lots of other reasons that it could fail. Does that make sense?
Like why your event might not get called, or sorry, no.
No, why you have a drop source that when you ask it for the data, you get a failure. There's all sorts of reasons why that could happen, right? And you don't know who the source thing is. So
what do you mean you can't get the data? As in the method doesn't get called, or if I try to like dot off the event?
No, there's iData object is what this stuff is all around. So you get the iData object, but if you try to call it, you get a failure or H result, right?
The try get data returns false, I assume.
Yeah. And the way this actually works, just from a technical perspective, like this other interface is just basically like a ref count. So you ask it, you try to get this interface off of the existing thing, and if you get it, then you can say like, hey, do you support async? And it'll tell you yes, and then you say, okay, I'm going to do it async, and then you just call the regular stuff you normally call, and when you're done, you say, all right, I'm done. And that's a way for it to know that the thing is still being held on to, right? And the process is still ongoing, even though the synchronous return from the drop, the OLE drop, has returned, right?
So is there any way we could guide people with analyzers here?
No.
No.
This is really, really narrow.
Yeah.
This has not come up in years and years and years. And
well, would it be wrong for anybody who is iDrop target to just always slap async drop target as well?
Well, they just have to like it's extra steps, so it's not going to hurt them. It's just like you need to know that you need to, if you're going to start messing with the UI, you need to push it back to the UI thread, right? Which this calls out. So it doesn't hurt anything, because this will only get called if the incoming drop actually supports async.
Okay. Sorry, that clarified a lot for me. I know you probably said this at the beginning, but the key difference here is, unlike on drag drop, this is not being called on the UI thread. Is that
correct?
That the key? Yeah, okay.
And that's cool. Yeah, and that's the first paragraph in the remarks here.
Sorry.
It's fine, but like so there's a fair amount of documentation that goes into this, and it doesn't hurt anything if you don't, unless you just use it without actually reading any of the docs, and you fire stuff off, and then your UI hangs, and you go, why?
Yeah.
Right, or fails for some other reason.
Do we have any other on async things that mean not on UI thread? Is that like a common thing for WinForms?
More and more, yes. That is the reason that we implemented like invoke async and all that stuff in .NET 9. So the interop with the projected Windows APIs, for example, there's tons of things that we're getting back on not on the UI thread, and the same is with the web view too. So there are also a couple of things or a couple of scenarios where we're getting things back which are not on the UI thread. So yes.
And the one alternative here from a finding stuff perspective is to go on drag drop async. Great. Just felt weird to me, but like I'm kind of stuck for people to discover this in any sort of rational way and kind of understand what they need to do, and like just following the existing naming pattern of the just regular on drag drop.
Yeah, I like
the
not
suffix,
ending it with async.
so the suffix async sounds like it should be a proper .NET async method.
Yeah, and it's not. So like, it's all uncomfortable a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't.
It's prior art stuff, and
I don't see any members
Jeremy and I,
named on async.
Just one remark. Pardon?
Go ahead, Klaus.
One remark to the discoverability is also something that Jeremy and I talked about. We're trying more and more to incorporate Copilot or specific Copilot instructions to have also with discoverability or with refactoring, and that could be a target for that as well. So that we're getting certain things pointed out in that context.
and another usage thing, like control already supports iDrop target. So
yeah,
there is some chance that somebody else would like be writing a drop target from scratch, but it's highly unlikely, right? So if you can see my example down there, like using regular text box, you just put async drop target on it, and this like enables that scenario where you can get the file list.
Yeah, so you said there are things that are using like on async, but I don't see any on asyncs in WinForms.
No, there isn't yet. There is no on. There's stuff that's async. There's no on async.
Because I wonder, given that this async is different than .NET async, I wonder if it should just be called background. So on background drag drop, meaning not on the main thread, or rather not on the UI thread. You can say I'm wrong, I just ask questions.
I don't know if that would, like, it might inhibit discovery a bit if people are coming from it from a you need to support, because the underlying interface, that I wrote that down somewhere, is async.
It's not a method that's
async in the name.
Async.
What was that, Klaus?
Yeah, I had one discussion that we didn't get to the end. So like Jeremy Kuhn and I was, I think as long as it's not ending with async and put people off with that, then to me, I mean, async is still the abbreviation for asynchronous, right? What I mean is, if we call it background or something like that, then the question is it more confusing for people just to avoid bending a naming rule that is not even completely violated? You know what I mean? It's like,
so the native interface is data object async capability. So if people are discovering this in reverse, like it doesn't work, and then people are from the native side or the other side are saying, well, you need to support data object async capability, they're more likely to find this, I think, if it's got async in the name. And I do call out the interface too, so it does help. But yeah. Personally, I lean towards async, but I hear your argument.
yeah, I would support that too, by the way. Except if it's ending with async, that I would not.
Yeah, well, which it's not. We already.
I mean, there was a property or a method or something.
So the rest of the literature, the Win32 literature refers to this as async, not background.
Fair enough. That, I mean, Windows doesn't have as much use of the word async as we do, so it's just
No.
Would it help people understand the difference instead of just like, oh, this one uses task? It's like, well, actually, it doesn't. If you need it to do something, you're gonna need to call invoke async, which either takes it looks like a Lambda, or maybe it takes a task.
Yeah, I considered trying to like write something that was actually async, but it ends up that's not really plausible because the thing has to return synchronously, right? The underlying piece. So there's no way to really inject things.
I mean, we have the problems with not consistent naming of async and WinForms anyway. I mean, this is not a good argument. Certainly not to make it even worse, but I mean, we have a method from the beginning that was called load async on image, I think it is, and that is not classically async. So, yeah.
Fair enough. So you mentioned control is already an iDrop target.
Yes.
Should control be an async drop target that just does invoke async on drop target? Or sorry, on drag drop?
We would have to make it a virtual on control for it to be worth doing anything.
Wait, so you're saying like the default would post? Sorry, am I understanding that correctly? Like the default would post to the UI thread and call the existing one on control? Is that the idea?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to make sure I was understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would just because the behavior is so different. Like you're going to get it back at a later time as opposed to the synchronous stuff that's going on with drag drop. I feel it's not a great idea for that to sort of magically happen.
Would it fire twice if you did that effectively in some cases?
Yeah, you're going to get the well, I could skip that, but that's all. I mean, it's just such a radical difference. I want that to. I tried to make it hidden and sort of magic. And the existing behavior is that it fires synchronously, right? So the hack that I put in, so that hack is there, and that firing it synchronously, you know that the existing code is going to work the same way. You're just like, from a discoverability perspective, you need to find out that the thing is hanging. And that's how I think people are going to find this, is that like they'll drag stuff from Outlook or whatever other app lets a file drop, and they're like, oh, they'll get complaints from users about like, oh, the UI froze, and until I figured out that I clicked the dialog over there, and then they'll find it from that level. It's like, oh, okay, I'll opt into it more explicitly in my app.
You plan on keeping the hack, as you call it, though, so you don't completely drop the events. Okay.
So they're not completely blocked. There's actually some call from customers to try and service this. You know, I don't know that that's plausible.
But I assume that if a thing is async drop target, you're only going to call the async one and not also call the sync one.
If there's nothing to complete, then you won't get it'll just return, right? So like you won't get the virtual call if you implement iasync, the existing virtual. You'll get this new one
right.
Will be the only one that's
I think Stefan had asked if it was going to get fired twice, and you said yes, and that confused me, so I asked it in a different way.
No.
I think that was in another hypothetical. It would be fired twice if we did the posting thing with the virtual, and he's like, maybe if I did prevent it. But anyway, yeah, that's not what we're doing.
Right, but then in that theoretic, if we implemented it on control as posting it sideways, then it would have handled the async by calling the synchronous one, but then it means it handled the async, so then the system shouldn't also call the synchronous one, so it shouldn't fire twice.
Okay.
Especially since iasync drop target says I drop target, and that would mean that every drop would fire twice for somebody who implemented this interface, which I don't think we want. So,
no.
Okay.
As a consumer, you can decide, you know, in your particular case, if you want to then sort of dispatch that back and fire your existing virtuals, right? But then you're in complete control, right?
Sure. I mean, you could also just explicitly implement it on control, so anybody who wanted to intercept it instead of overriding a virtual would just slap a new iasync drop target and on their type and either
Well,
explicitly or
if
implicitly
I
implement
do
the
that, I
interface.
have no way of telling that they've opted into it. So I'd have to put another mechanism into it because
Fair
the
enough.
other goal here is that the existing stuff, the existing code will work, just not.
You want to know if you can drop the
smoothly.
hack. Okay. Fair enough. And the same drag event args are going to work fine. I looked at it. It looks like it's coordinates and then the data object, and then the data object is just
Yeah,
going to work.
the data object's a COM object, but it's already wrapped behind a. It's behind the global interface table, so it can be accessed from any thread. It's probably, presumably, if you're implementing this, it would be thread safe, period. But it's behind a. It's behind the Windows abstraction that will dispatch that appropriately as it needs to.
Okay. Any other comments?
I might keep this as, depending on how I feel as I get closer to the end, is like experimental.
Oh yeah,
Because
that
there's
was
very little examples out there. Like there's very few hits on utilizing this stuff. So I want to get some. I might want to consider feedback from people. Like I might need additional context or whatever. I don't expect to have to change it, but like in the Windows code base, I get like 6 hits and nobody actually consumes it. So for example, right, it's pretty rare.
That's also why we thought it would be nice to have it for Preview 5, which snaps I think next Monday, so that we have like time to test.
Well, the poke people,
Yeah,
we have it.
yeah, you know what I mean, though, right?
Yeah.
All right. And I asked about control specifically, but I'll, since I already wrote down that I asked, there's nothing that should be implementing this at the same time?
No.
Okay. All right. Poop. The list of faces has grown, but I don't see Mr. Swalina. So we will jump to, I guess we'll jump to Klaus's rename, because it should be easy. Right, so let's consider renaming screen capture mode to form screen capture mode, WinForms 13450. So we recently added the screen capture mode enum and property, and you want to rename something, Klaus.
Yeah, so while I was implementing them, so that API, I first of all, my concern that it would only work on top level was right, and that means it only applies to forms. And since we have introduced a series of additional form controlling properties in .NET 9, which are listed under the is it GIF or GIF? Oh god, yeah. Okay, forget it. Under the animated picture, like form corner preference, form border color. So the new, like Windows 11 APIs. I was thinking that just having form as a prefix would just fit better. It's not a big deal. It's just, if not, then not. But I think it's fitting better, and that's the only thing I wanted to change. But I would like to keep though the enum as it is, and not rename that one too, because that's a personal preference. I don't like property names necessarily that return a type with the same name. That's, I don't know, I find it confusing when looking things up in IntelliSense and so, but that's my That's my personal opinion.
So you want to rename the
I just
property, but not
want
the
to
type.
rename- Yes. Well, the enum. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So you want that.
Don't you want that on form now instead of control?
Oh, it already is on form.
It's not in.
Okay, I copied that from the approval notes.
Oh yeah,
approval was control.
okay, yeah, that's true. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
if
I
you,
didn't touch that one.
if you want to move it to form, because it only works on form, that's fine with us. I think that was one of the notes was because what we wrote is putting it on control seems to make sense, even though hide window is only valid on top level forms. If research says this is a bad idea, moving it to form is fine.
Okay.
But if it's so you want it on
Okay.
form and to say form.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody object to the enum not matching the property name?
Why is it form screen capture mode instead of screen capture mode? Sorry, if you already went over that, considering it's on form.
So originally, I thought there was a way to also obscure just parts of the form, which would have made it necessary to just implement it on control. But there wasn't. I mean, the Windows API clearly stated, and I knew that from the beginning, that you can do that with top-level Windows. But I thought there was a way anyway, but there isn't, and so I had to give that route up, and that's why we ended up with top-level Windows, being obscurable or like able to hide, and thus now when I tested that, I stumbled over the other properties that we're implementing, and everything, started with form, and I was thinking, okay, if it is now only form, then we should also, be consistent to the other naming and just name it form screen capture mode.
Yeah, okay, I remember the original proposal now, where you had it both for control and form, and that form derives from control. Yeah, I guess if we do it for other properties, sorry to rehash that.
Yeah,
no, it's fine.
Yeah, seems fine.
It looks like it's form.form corner preference, so that seems to be a pattern that has been patterned.
Cool. We love patterns here.
We do.
And I mean, and this wasn't like a redundancy I would have liked to have back when we proposed the naming for those four properties, because we also had form border style already, because it's just behaving differently from border style, which is on some controls again, and so to be consistent to that, this is like a chain of living with the constraints of the past, if you will. What we in terms of naming. So.
All right. Sounds like we're good with that one.
Vielen Dank.
Bitte. All right. Now, I still don't see Christoph, so we'll jump over generic Cinder to factory methods to create immutable dictionary instances from dictionary expressions. .NET runtime 114090 for I feel like the third time.
I think it's the second, maybe. I'm
Okay.
not sure. Could you scroll down to the bottom? So we had yeah, there's right there. So I think yeah, Chuck is here as well, so he could talk to it as well. But we had approved this, and then we realized that there were some issues with it. In particular, the we approved new overloads of some existing create range methods for immutable dictionary, but there's a behavioral difference with what the language provides for dictionary expressions and what our general creation methods provide. So our for the most part, most of our APIs for creating dictionaries implement throw on duplicate behavior. So dictionaries constructor and the create range methods on immutable dictionary and so on. The one exception to this is frozen dictionary, which since it was introduced has always provided overwrite on duplicate behavior for uninteresting reasons. The dictionary expressions also provide overwrite on duplicate behavior, and it seems problematic to have overloads of create range, some of which have throw on duplicate and some of which have overwrite on duplicate. So even though we approved it previously, once we realized that, we decided we need to come up with another approach. And what we landed on here and what Chuck has proposed is just choose a name that makes it clear that there's overwrite behavior. And so instead of create range, the proposal is just create range with overwrite. We don't know of other cases where we would be adding more of these, but if there were, this would also establish a pattern where we would add with overwrite. Yeah, that's where we are. Open for discussion and ideas.
So is the language feature going to say if it sees collection builder, then look for create range with overwrite, and if that fails, look for create range, and if that fails, fail?
No, sorry. Actually, the code sample is a little bit wrong. The code at that collection builder attribute should have in the name of it should have create range with overwrite. That's a typo. So it looks for the exact thing that you specify in the attribute.
Oh, okay. So just the up here didn't get edited.
Exactly. And if that doesn't exist, it's a compiler error.
Okay, so there's no pattern sniffing on the type. It is invoke this method.
It's get effect. Chuck can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's get the method group with the specified name on the specified type, and then find the one that has the right signature. The right parameters. And if they can't find one, it fails.
That's correct. We look for methods named with the name in that collection builder attribute, create a method group from that, and then based on the arguments, we do overload resolution on that method group to find the most applicable method.
The other variation we could consider here as well is if we didn't want to sort of highlight these, we could consider having them, but making them editor browsable never or something, because we expect that the vast majority usage of them will come via dictionary expressions. So while people may call these methods, and we want them to be available in case they, might want to call them, or from other languages, the vast majority will be using dictionary expressions to do it. I don't think we need editor browsable never, but I wanted to highlight it just in case.
Yeah, it seems fine. Let somebody choose to call it if they wanted to. I feel like there was a point in this from background discussion that there was a discussion of inverting the polarity of the collection builder attribute. I think that one's not needed here. I think it was for frozen, but is that also still subject to change, or are we happy with collection builder attribute?
Sorry, I didn't understand. What polarity are you talking about?
The current thing is you have to mark on the collection who can build it, and because of layering, there was a discussion that something was going to have to say, I can build this other guy.
Oh, I see. There's no feature for that in the C# language at present for any of the builder stuff. So you have to put it on the thing being built who builds you.
Okay.
There was some discussion, I think, of should we consider adding such a feature to C# in the future. I think it raises complexity concerns and cost concerns, but
Sure. I mean, really, that's just me checking here that this proposal is not missing the other half of the
no,
discussion.
this is the only way to do it. And the collection builder stuff in general is only necessary for things that are read only after construction. So like we don't have such an attribute on dictionary or sorted dictionary or ordered dictionary. Those aren't necessary because they're mutable, and so the compiler can. Sorry, go ahead, Stefan.
Do they call add for the other ones? I was actually trying to look at source.net for the references to the collection builder attribute and so forth.
So for the compiler is free to do whatever it wants as far as how it builds it, and it has special knowledge of certain constructors on core types like dictionaries. So if it wants to, pass, as long as the semantics are enabled, it can do whatever it wants. But generally, it's going to call add, or try add, or actually more likely it's going to use the indexer to get overwrite behavior.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where I was going to follow up.
Okay, and then out of curiosity, and I'm not saying we do this, I just want to know it's possible. Is this method allowed to go on another type? Like if we wanted to hide it?
If we want to hide it, we can put it wherever we want. The only requirement is that the type has to be non-generic, and it has to be accessible it has to be nameable from the thing that it's attributing.
And so for everything else, it's just create, and we decide create range for a mutable dictionary just because like it already had create.
It already has create range.
Yeah, or it already has create range. Got it. Okay, so it's just standard for the mutable dictionary.
Okay, and so Frozen we're leaving alone, right? It's
Frozen we're leaving alone. It doesn't.
still ignoring that.
Yeah, we already that feature was already merged. Doesn't need any changes. Frozen dictionary already has the behavior that maps to what dictionaries provide, to what dictionary expressions provide. So there's no discrepancy.
I think it seems fine to me as proposed, if I'm understanding it well enough. A little wordy, but no one will call it.
Yeah.
Probably.
That's the thinking, is that it'll be rare to see this actually show up in code because it'll just be using dictionary expressions. I mean, from my perspective, I wouldn't be sad if this didn't get used at all because I'm not a big fan of Mutable Dictionary, but that's me.
You would use Frozen Dictionary in almost any case. You'd use Immutable.
I would use almost any other dictionary except for very, very rare cases.
Yeah, well, because isn't Immutable Dictionary like a B tree, so it's not O1, it's O log n?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the worst dictionary.
I think it's an ABL tree, but yeah.
Yeah, it's what I get for trying to say data structures words.
Same idea.
Yeah.
It's optimized for a very specific case.
Right.
That is
Functional programmers love it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I got you.
You're going to be mutating, logically mutating, creating new versions from the old version, and you want to share as much of the objects as possible when you do.
So it saves space potentially and stuff like that. If that matters.
Yeah. If you're building up an immutable dictionary, with add each time creating a new one, or change or whatever, it's a much more efficient way to do that than dictionary.add or new dictionary from an old dictionary, new dictionary from an old dictionary, etc. But other than that, it's the name that you think you want for the thing that you generally don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yes, so create already existed for give me a thing with no values, and then create range is give me a thing with values, and now we have create range with overwrite, or over,
Yeah,
We said
create
overwrite.
range with overwrite or whatever you want
Overwrite,
to name
yeah.
it. Has the same behavior as create, the same signature basically as create range. It's
Yep.
taking the collection of stuff to add, but it's doing overwrite instead of throw on duplicate.
Yeah, and not that we would do this, but I assume it would be not possible, or we're not interested in changing the language to like pass an additional argument to enable overwrite behavior or something.
I think we discussed that and contemplated it, but ended up saying no.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, if we had to do it over again, I wouldn't be surprised if all of our dictionaries implemented overwrite rather than throw on duplicate. But which one you want really depends on your use case.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna leave the frozen. I've copied it back into the thing just so there's no confusion of it was approved once and then got smaller when approved again. But
sounds good.
So adding with overwrite to what we previously approved and updating this to match is the change. I hear no objections. Cool. And I see Mr. Swalina, which means it's party time. All right. If I can... No, Teams, quit blocking clicks. All right. Support for generic sender parameter in event handler 28289. So now we look at something and we see, oh, someone wants to add an event that uses a parameter other than object sender, and then I say that goes against guidelines, and then they say the guideline is stupid. Discuss.
Wait, are we saying that events are stupid? No, sorry.
So
they're useful.
Before we look at the merits of this, the thing we have to discuss is, do we even want the idea of this because we have a guideline that says thou shalt make the first parameter in an event object sender. So we either are thinking maybe there are niche situations that we want this and it's okay and we say don't use it, or maybe we say we don't want this at all, or maybe we say that guideline is stupid and we should delete it. So
what's the reason that guideline is there in the first place?
Christoph, you're up.
Yeah, so basically the part of the guideline that says sender should be an object was pushed by the WinForms team because they wanted to have a single event handler that can handle, let's say, a clicked event on multiple controls. So imagine that the sender was strongly typed. You would have to have two handlers, one for when a button is clicked and the other one when is, let's say checkbox is clicked. But maybe the handler, the only thing that it does is toggles whether the control is enabled or disabled. But I had a side discussion with Jeremy and basically based on some other APIs that I participated in design over the years, it seems like there should be a choice for the framework designer. If the framework designer is designing a framework similar to like a UI framework like WinForms, and they want to support the scenario of having a single handler for multiple types is important to them, sure, make it object or make it control, frankly. But in a lot of situations, a type sender would be, I think, more appropriate and more convenient.
I assume if we had had generics in .NET Framework 1.0, we would have just had this be event handler with tsender.
That one, I also don't know. Possibly we would have something like tsender and then WinForms would parameterize it with control. I can imagine that.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
You automatically get contravariance when you use generics in a delegate argument.
No, but you can specify covariance or contravariance.
Yeah, on the
It's like an
TS.
interface. You can
Yeah.
do like in.
You can do in or out, but you don't get it
Yeah.
for free.
I see.
Yeah, they're
So we probably
invariant by
would then,
default.
if we did it
Yeah, you'd want it to be in.
in contravariant, right? I always mix them up, but I think it's contravariant. Covariance IEnumerable. That's usually what I remember. Anyway.
Yeah, I just recalled another reason. Oh, sorry, Jeremy, I didn't tell you that one. Also, WinForms team was saying and claiming that it's problematic to call the sender methods on the sender in a callback, which now I find it inconsistent with the, oh, I want to disable the either button or the checkbox. I thought they were kind of like saying the object should be used in most cases just for like identity, to say like, oh, am I, is this control calling me or this other one? So you would do just object equality comparison. Calling methods, they saw it as problematic, or at least a scenario that users should be very careful about. So they didn't want to make it too easy.
They were concerned about reentrancy or something?
Something like this. I now vaguely, because basically the handler already runs on the UI thread, correct? In all UI frameworks. So, I mean, maybe there's some reentrancy issue, but there's no like the UI thread issue. It was.
I'm 100% certain I've seen, and I'm pretty sure I've written cases where I've just cast the center to the thing that I know it is and then use it.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just thought I'm gonna mention it because I want to represent their position as much carefully as possible.
There might have been something related to tooling as well. I see Klaus is back on, but I'll let him, like, from a designer perspective, it might have been extra work or difficult to do historically to support if it wasn't
sorry,
object.
our internet just went down, so I'm on the phone, and even the LTE 5G connection here in Deval is not very good, so I hope you can understand me.
Yes.
You sound
Yeah, we
good.
can hear you.
Okay, cool. So if I remember correctly, back in the time, there were concerns about a couple of things, but that was, if I remember correctly, it was about the way how we defined events in Visual Basic in a compatible way to VB6. And the problem that we still have today is that we can, for example, consume event handlers that are based on generics, but you cannot easily define them in VB. The problem is that there's a difference between Visual Basic and C#. If you define an event handler as a generic, then there is no equivalent in Visual Basic to do that, because you define an event in Visual Basic not via the event handler, but by stating the event args. And you cannot, state a generic in the event args that reflects back to the event handler. So that is one thing. But that does not count for the sender, if I remember correctly. And I'm fortunately not able to try that out right now. So I wouldn't have a problem with that. That said, if in C# we would define an event handler based on a generic, then Visual Basic can consume that. So that's the constraints that I have in my head.
Yeah. So one thing to remember is that the guideline preceded this event handler of T and generic. The guideline is independent, in my opinion. Like, the reason for the guideline's existence is independent from, generic types, generic event handlers. In V1 of the framework, when WinForms were introduced, and we already added this guideline, the way to do event handlers was to just create your own delegate And basically, you would create a custom delegate, you would call it button clicked, and you would make a sender and event args, correct? There was nothing generic here, yet still we had a guideline, make the sender be object. So now I also like to answer Steve's question, like, would we have it as event handler of T if generics existed? Yeah, I think they may be related issues, but that was not the motivation, because the guideline existed despite the fact that we were creating handcrafted handlers and they could be strongly typed.
But I mean, when we created V1, there weren't generics, right? They only were introduced in 2.0.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that event
okay.
handlers were being created by hand. So a developer would create button-clicked event handler,
Yeah.
or control-clicked event handler, and it would have 2 parameters.
Yeah.
And the guideline would still say, make the first parameter object. It didn't say make it into, like button or checkbox or something. It said, make it object. And now I think the proposal is, imagine that we didn't still have generics. The proposal is still on the table. Why don't we send the guideline and basically allow some frameworks to make the object strongly typed, the sender strongly typed? And again, for the record, I do support this guideline. I think it would be a good modification for many frameworks that don't need this event handler polymorphism. And even those that do need some, they would pass the first type parameter be some base type over which they want the polymorphism to be.
Yeah, the only reason I was asking about with the generics is because without generics, you're back in, if you're trying to strongly type the first argument or the first parameter, you're then having to declare your own delegate for each one, which we try and get away from. And so there it makes sense. You're just using object because there's just the one thing that uses object. The moment you have generics, it's easy to have whatever you want. I guess I don't see the benefit of the guideline. I'm struggling to even understand what the benefit was back then, even though you did a good job of enumerating what you remember from 20 years ago, which is impressive. Yeah, I don't. My only concern, which isn't a real concern, is that starting in 2025, we'll start to have event handlers that differ from the rest of the framework, from the rest of the libraries. But
yeah, but you see, the way I think we've handled this in the past, we would say, like, if you have an existing technology, like let's say WinForms should not change the guideline. WinForms should kind of like keep going if I don't know if we even change WinForms, but if there's a new event in WinForms, we would follow the old patterns. But if there's a new technology, new library, I think it's totally fine to switch to a new guideline.
Honestly, I'm even wondering why we would need to keep that in WinForms. I mean, we could also do that with a new style.
What do you mean? We would not break existing WinForms APIs, correct?
No, I wouldn't, of course, not rename them. But for example, one thing we could, or even we should do, what we talked about was, people have difficulties to pick up like the async versions of events, for example. And we could introduce, for example, like async event handlers, and that would then follow the new guidelines. That's what I mean. Because the construct in Windows itself would not prevent that from happening. I mean, surely, we're not changing the existing event handlers, but it would be possible to consume them in theory in Visual for WinForms.
So it'd be nice if we could have a type hierarchy of the delegate.
Well,
Sorry.
so when I was saying that, like, I would carve it by like existing technology or new technology, and I suggested, it's a new package, like, we have a new UI framework, it could start using the typed event handlers or whatnot. I didn't mean to say that I think the granularity or the boundary, what constitutes a technology that should be consistent, is a package. I think you just suggested that maybe the boundary is existing sync events one way, and now new events that are, let's say async, are a different pattern. I don't have a strong opinion of what the granularity of consistency should be. I was just saying, like, we can pick the granularity, and within, an existing tech, I think we should keep existing patterns, and in a new tech, I think it's fine to use the new patterns. Now, specifically about the async event handlers, if you are interested, we should talk. We try to use asynchronous event handlers in Azure SDK, and I would say it's not successful. Async event handlers are, I don't know, we couldn't design them such that it all makes sense.
I mean, the problem is, I know, I experimented then in the Windows, in the WinForms context as well, and you run into things like, can they at all run quasi-parallel, because then it's a different pattern, because, it doesn't make sense for a couple of events to fire practically at the same time, which would happen. And there are other issues that you run into, but depending on the method that you are, firing the events off of, that sometimes it's really difficult to go from sync to async, because the nature of the sender and what it's sending is only consumable in an async way. So, and then people screw things up, because then it's just like, you always have problems when you have void async or async void, even if it is an event handler, because they forget to, do the to try catch block then in those kind of event handlers. And then especially in WinForms, people are wondering why, the app crashes without even saying anything. That's why I was thinking, well, what is the trade-off between a form of async handlers in for WinForms that has kind of a guiding, how should I put it? Like a guiding function, but then at the same time it introduces interesting cases where you open up a new box of problems, if you will.
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud here. So sorry when I'm
no, like you got
here.
me thinking in general, just kind of from a base thing, and maybe this is just, we don't use event handler a lot in like ASP.NET Core. We don't have the same context, so we're different in a lot of ways. But like, what is the benefit of like defining a new event handler type over just having like, if you're for these new events, just say, it's an action of tsender t event args. You can still be an event. You know what I mean?
Are you asking what's the difference between event handler versus just using any other delegate, or are you asking what is the difference between...
It's like, why do we need to define a new core type? Like for new people, it'd just be like, well, event handler is, kind of archaic. Let's just use action, like these days.
Yeah, I would say, I'm not saying that, like we should go one way or the other, but I would say the main difference is that event handler of 2 T's is kind of like a small delta from existing pattern. So it's easier for users to understand. Imagine that, they see a new tech, let's say completely new UI framework, and suddenly all event handlers are now event handler of T1, T2. No, we don't have to explain what's going on. It's kind of like, I think it would feel completely natural to majority of developers who used other UI frameworks in the past.
And it would completely exclude Visual Basic users for using that.
That's a separate issue. But
I didn't know
we
that.
should discuss this, whether we would do it or not. I'm just saying, like, action of T or or two T's. It has exactly the same problem. It doesn't work for Visual Studio, but it has additional problem. It does not look like an existing pattern, and I suspect. And actually, we do have some evidence because we also tried some APIs with actions and whatnot, and they take some time for the user to wrap their head around what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, at least with VBNet, it looks like the event syntax A does not automatically inject a source parameter, and B just does whatever you want. So it writing event just creates a delegate and a handler based on the first line of Visual Basic I've written in years. I had to look up the syntax. So I'm not sure that VB would be cut off from a 7-argument event handler.
Well, it would insofar as you define not an event handler, you just define the event and the so how you consume it, not via the event handler. You define an event in Visual Basic by the exact signature or stop the signature of the method that will then consume the event, which means you write something like and I'm doing that from the top of my head now because I have no internet, and that's why my whole computer doesn't work right now. You write public event name, and then opening brace, and then sender as object, comma, and then event arc as E. So that means in the signature where you define the events, you are already using the event arcs that have been that are there, and from there, so from the event arcs, the Visual Basic compiler produces the event handler. So it's the other way around, which means since I already have the type that I'm using, that type needs to be defined in its original way somewhere, and I cannot do that by defining it myself in Visual Basic. I could consume something that has been defined in C#, because then the event arcs that have been defined as generic are there for me to consume, but I cannot go the other way, as far as I know. So like with 90%, 80% certainty.
Right. So you're saying VB can't declare an event making use of the new handler types, but they can, if we declared events using a 2-argument event handler, they would bind to it.
Yeah. Like I would carefully state that's the case, and I even think, but this is like this. I'm really sorry because this is like 15 years ago, or 20 years ago that I tried that. I even think that the compiler prevents you to like have something where you say dim handler and then equals and then the actual event handler, and then do it the same way in C#, because I think, if I remember correctly, the compiler would then state, hey, you are defining an event handler, don't do that. Define your event directly in Visual Basic. So which means but I'm not sure if I remember that correctly. And
more than that, really quick, if I can just shred in, haven't we already crossed the Rubicon, as far as that goes? Looking at event handler of T event args, it doesn't have a constraint on event args. That code is already broken with some generic event args. I mean, I think there used to be a constraint. That's the comment.
Yeah, I mean, we seem to have said we don't. I mean, the existence of the event handler delegate and the event handler of to args delegate says we don't care that VB can't reuse it, as long as if we're saying VB couldn't bind to events, then that's a reason to be concerned. But if we're saying VB can't declare them using the new features, I don't think we care.
How many event handler of T events do we have in the framework? Oh, how did you do it so quickly?
I just clicked here. So I mean, some of these are repeating of the same args, but serializing, changed and changing.
So does it mean all these APIs don't work for VB, or they do, or it just doesn't
they don't have the constraint anymore? So I mean, it could work, right, if they happen to derive from event args. So I bet you a lot of them do, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Hey, I found one that wasn't an event args. No, it's also an internal event, so who cares?
ASP.NET Core, how dare we? No, I'm just kidding. It's amazing we used events.
I mean, I guess right here, nope, internal class.
Oh, in casual test, I wonder, did I write that? Maybe.
Don't write public event in internal class. Write internal event.
This is test code. You can change it. I'll accept your PR.
Our internet is back. I hope it holds now.
All right. ASP.NET Core components quick grid pagination state total item count changed. Dropped.
We do use it in Blazor. That's actually public, yeah, in some places. We also have a sync context for that.
I just posted something into the chat, by the way, for VB.
So, but anyway, regardless how it all works, to me there's two different issues. One is where is it appropriate to use this event handler, and whether we have constraints and all these other issues to make it work with VB. And the second one is, do we add this new type or not? And it seems like, and we loosen the type of the sender object, because it seems to me like the latter issue, like, well, that's just a continuation of what we have today, correct? Like, if it doesn't work,
that's kind of what I was trying to say. Yeah, I think we've already broken VB if we care.
Yeah.
So, like, I think it would be reasonable to discuss kind of two separate issues, which is, are we adding this type and we allowing some features to use it, to use the type sender, and the second one, how do we take care of the issue that VB may not work with some of these APIs?
I don't understand Claus's screenshot. The same thing fails for if you just do public event potato and you don't declare a C# style, because you can't take a dim to an event. That's just not allowed ever.
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah. I'm sorry. I just saw that I added the event keyword and as event handler. Yeah, I screwed up. I'm sorry. If you, yeah. Okay, so I have to stand corrected. Embarrassing. Let me do a new screenshot because that works. The error message was kind of confusing, or confused me at least. So, well, like defining the event handler manually, that works, and you can raise the event the classic way. You can just not raise it with the proposed way in Visual Basic to raise an event. Okay, let me fix that then.
I don't see any issue with an event handler of like int32. You can still raise event potato2 nothing 0. And it looks to work for an arbitrary delegate as well. You can just use it with an action, for example. For reference, here's just a simple example where raise event works just fine with VB declaring it using not even event handler at all.
So it seems like VB would be able to even use this new thing. They would just have to say public event potato3 as event handler of whatever, comma, whatever.
I mean, that I agree is working, and that I didn't say was not working. The other way, where you had the second T, how would you do that?
It's the exact same way you can use any action with any number of T's. Like you can just add a second of int32 there or of bool, and then you can just pass in false, and it works because all that it cares is that you're raising it with the right signature. So potato20 false works.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you wouldn't. Okay. Yeah. So you wouldn't have the second parameter, you wouldn't just have the action delegate with several types, right?
Well, all VB
Like,
cares
I mean,
is you're passing in the right type, so it changes from accepting any object to requiring you to pass in a specific type of object with the constrained version, because it's going to be event handler, T sender, T event args. And so T-sender, instead of being object, which everything implicitly can cast to, means it has to be that specific one. And if we make it covariant, then it can be that one or a derived type.
Yeah, so far so good, but what I'm saying is we post that in the chat.
Minor nit. I think the contravariance only really matters for assigning event handlers to like other event handlers, but like you should always be able to pass a more specific type to a method call. But yeah, either way, I think we're good.
Too many windows open right now.
All right, so it sounds like there's not a VB concern, so we're back to two things. One, are we okay with changing object sender? And two, do we feel that we need to continue constraining ourselves to a sender comma argument recommendation? Certainly the sender comma argument recommendation solves the problem of later you want to add another parameter, assuming that you made your own custom event args to begin with. But if you just use event args, you don't.
Yeah, so this constraint to event args, that's also a separate issue. I don't know if you guys discussed it already. So, we had constraint, and then the constraint was already removed. And the reason is that I think in some of the networking APIs, Steve may remember, there was a performance constraint concern. Like the team wanted to have a bunch of handlers where there was no allocation for the event arcs, and the event arcs would be a struct. So we actually removed the constraint, and we removed. I think we changed the guideline to basically say, fine, event arcs doesn't have to actually inherit from event arcs. You should still have event arcs, meaning type that you own, to which you can always keep adding more stuff, so that you don't have to change the signature of the handler. But it doesn't actually have to inherit from event arcs.
Yes, the derived from event args is in 3rd edition in the obsolete guidance section. So
exactly. Yep.
So that means we removed it in in the 2019 review, because our book published to great, as in no fanfare, because there was a pandemic on. So.
Yeah. Steve or anybody else, does anybody remember, like, when did we do the feature in the networking stack and started to add those track-based event arcs?
I don't remember specifically for the networking stack, but I think it was around .NET Framework 4 or 4.5. And I seem to remember it was around the time that we were doing something with WinRT, but I don't remember the details.
I thought now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's actually sockets. Like we have some events in socket space. I thought that's where it was.
Yeah, socket event arcs are a thing, but yeah, I'm not sure if it's related.
The WinRT thing makes sense to me. Like if that had been constrained, we wouldn't have been able to use it probably for projections, because there's no arcs in WinRT.
And the comment is post net 4, and that comment is present in the NetFX source as well. So it means, like, for 4.5 it was removed. Somewhere around here I'll find a networking library.
There is one in sockets, but it derives from event arcs.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Fair enough.
I think it might have been maybe with Progress of T.
Yeah, I was gonna say Progress of T has a no constraint on its T and has a progress changed handler,
which we had done as part of the WinRT work, because it was used in the async projections.
Yep. So no constraints, and then event handler of T. So this one could have been a value, or could be a value type, could be a reference type that isn't event args, but you're still limited to the one thing you are eventing.
I think at the end of the day, we can, we can decide how we want to tweak the guidelines. I don't even know at this point where the guidelines are published, except in a book that's not, that's behind a paywall. I don't see a problem with adding the generic event handler, and then we just need to figure out exactly where we want to tell people it's okay to use it. But I don't really see any. I don't even know if we need any guidance around it anymore. It's prefer to use it than not, and use it however you want.
Yeah, it always seemed a bit of anachronism to me to see like objects under with event args. I never fully understood it.
I get it. Like
we started out with the reasons, but yeah, I guess if you can do it. Sorry.
I feel like back in when would this have been? 2010 or 2012 or something. We added the generic event handler. We probably should have revisited the guidelines then, and revisited whether it should have been object sender or T sender, but we didn't.
also wanted to add some context even to something you said earlier about like what other like examples of other frameworks could there be where this might be useful. Like one of the reasons why I also like wanted to get this in is that in the WinRT projections, for instance, we have Windows Foundation event handler of T, which currently we custom map to system event handler of T, and that works fine. But then we also have Windows Foundation typed event handler of tsender targs, which, because there's no built-in equivalent handler in the BCL, we have to project as is. So we end up projecting Windows Foundation typed event handler, which means that across the entire Windows SDK API surface, as well as Windows App SDK or any other projected WinMD, you have this split where half the events are system event handler of T and half the events are Windows Foundation typed event handler. And this has been like a pain point for years from people being like, why is this thing typed event handler instead of like an event handler? And it's just confusing and it causes friction when like you're layering things across different projects and it's just annoying. So for instance, there's like over 700 concrete instantiations of typed event handler just in the Windows SDK API surface. And so like, for instance, if we had this, we could just custom map both to be system and event handler of either T or tsender targs. And then we would just delete typed event handler entirely. And then from C# you would only ever use system event handler. And so that would also be much more consistent given that the event handler is already there anyway. We have to project it some way. This would just make it so much like nicer and more consistent. Just
wait, so am I understood? Yeah, that's interesting. Am I understanding correctly that you ship a typed event handler delegate as a public delegate type already, and you could delete it? Wouldn't that be breaking?
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's also why I was saying at least for us, either we can make this in .NET 10 where we are considering doing some breaking changes, or like if we added this later, we wouldn't be able to ever use it basically because we get one chance to make breaking changes. So we're trying to just do everything together.
Wait, is it currently something similar with ASP.NET and System Web? We had our one chance to make breaking changes, so exactly. I get it.
So I'm just,
All right.
Like basically everything that's been like annoying or kind of broken in the entire like past 20 years of WinRT projections, and say, okay, here's everything that we can make right now.
I get it. I'm sure you've heard how painful it's going to be. Like it's like Python 3. Yeah, it's just like we've all been through it. But yeah, a lot of it's rough. But good luck.
Thanks.
Netcore 1.
So I've got a question related to the proposal here. Given that delegates aren't assignment compatible to other delegates even if the signatures match, why do we need a new event handler at all? Why not just use action T1?
That's what I said. That's exactly what I said. And then Christoph is like, but people expect event handler. But you're right. We have now 3 flavors of event handlers that you can't convert between easily. I mean, you can, but it's not.
It kind of feels like at this point, rather than exposing yet another delegate type, just tell people use action matching the signature they want moving forward, which is how we tell people to use all other delegates. And VB can use that as well. Like we showed in the earlier sample, they can just do as any delegate type. So you can just use an action, and then we don't need another new type. We don't need to have incompatibilities. If someone already has an action they want to use, they don't need to create a wrapper around it to switch it between action and event handler or anything like that. They can just use the standard type that everything else uses, including.
I mean, to be frank, like in the APIs that I do, like I often go that route, and I even go further, right, and do like cancellation token.register style, like iDisposable, like it depends on like the ergonomics you want for the API. But like Sergio just said, he's gonna ship his own delegate types because like people expect event handlers, right? So I guess maybe it's pragmatic to be like people aren't gonna do action.
Yeah, my concern with this is that like it would end up being inconsistent no matter what, because like there's, for instance, iCommand has event handler, so then you would still end up with some kind of split of saying half of these events are event handler and then half are now action all of a sudden, and then people will just be equally as confused where before they were with saying, what is this typed event handler? And then they will be like, why do I need an action? I have an event. like, and then you have to explain things. And there's just a fundamental semantics assumption from everyone that like actions are generally for like callbacks, that kind of thing, or like function that you pass to like link or whatever. Whereas for event handlers, for events, you have event handler. It's just like what
Which are
people
still
generally expect.
callbacks.
Yeah, but it's like a different, like specifically for events. Like it's just something that people expect. They're used to. They also match what the name is on, like for instance, for us in the WinRT side. Like if you custom map event handler of T or type event handler to event handler, that's clear. Of course, that's just the built-in C# version. If you suddenly change it to action, like that would be weird. It's
I
just
think it'd be also less conflicting with everyone who's defined their own custom event handler so far. And just generally less breaking to the ecosystem. Everyone who's got their own custom event handler, which uses the name event handler, won't break. And everyone can just be told switch over to action moving forward.
I mean, I personally don't see how, like, to me, like it's been said before, like this feels like just a small incremental kind of like natural progression to what we had with like the other two event handlers versus just saying to everyone, just stop doing this entirely, just like use actions for everything. It just seems to me confusing, and it would also remain inconsistent anyway, because then you would still end up with a bunch of event handlers that you cannot fix, like in iCommand, for instance.
I mean, you could just use action for everything if you're going to make a single break. Like that is an option, right? Like all your events could just change to actions.
Right,
Yeah,
but
but
they're
like
not going to be compatible.
you still wouldn't be able to fix all of them. Like for instance, we couldn't fix iCommand because that's just a type in the BCL.
I see.
And also there's
Yeah.
still the fact that people fundamentally like the concept of like it's one thing to say, yeah, we can make some breaking change, but like as long the idea is to still make things like not make it cognitive difficult for people. Like if you just change from typed event handler to event handler, like people would be like, yeah, sure, I get it. It's just a built-in event handler type, that's fine. If you change it to like action, that is much more complicated to like explain to people. Like it's not, I wouldn't say it's the same.
And Tanner, like, yeah, to back you up a little bit, Sergio, like I actually agree with you. Like I don't use event handler that much, and I assume that I probably didn't write that Kestrel test, the event handlers to tell. But like, so like I kind of agree with you, but I think the people who would do event handler of tsender T event args were never going to use action, right? They were going to like do their own delegate type or something. So I don't think it hurts to add tsender T event args.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we start suggesting to people that they should write events using action, that they'll start thinking that they should move into flat call instead of 2arg, and that's why I think that's the other item up for discussion. If we think that it's still generally good to nudge events into the 2-argument pattern, then I think adding one more named delegate isn't a problem.
If we stick with event handler, do we want to add in to both type parameters, and do we want to allow ref struct?
Yeah, and I assume we actually don't care about constraining tsender to be a class. It's proposed here, but I don't think we would care.
I don't think it matters.
Well, I don't think where tsender is sub of object does anything. It's the same as the default constraint, isn't it?
Is it?
No, you will be able to pass like a struct.
It constrains it to be class.
Yeah.
But
because I think it's the same as a class
is
constraint.
different from object.
Oh, I see what you mean. I think maybe they meant where tsender is class, not object. Is object even valid in C# as a constraint?
Nope, I tried it. It's class.
Okay.
But it gives you a very helpful warning. It's like you probably went class. So go Roslyn team.
I mean, it'd be like that times when it's like, you can't say constrained on enum. It's like, but you can. The IL allows it.
Well, I think in IL there is no object constraint because the IL spec specifies it to be the default because everything is object except for ref structs which are recent. Because even ints are passable to things that are object. They're just boxed at that point. And so an int inherits from object in the type hierarchy.
Yeah, I feel like we could allow ref struct in either position. I don't see a reason why we.
If we end up allowing it for T event args, we probably want to go back and add it to the existing one, which is fine, but we should just be consistent.
I mean, I guess it would be weird if you had to say event handler of object, comma, your type, if you just wanted a ref struct event args.
And similarly, if we add in the T event args, we should add in to the existing one as well, just for consistency. I don't think there's any downside. At least not that I'm aware
I
of.
agree.
There's no. I know removing it would be theoretically breaking. Removing it would be breaking. I don't think adding or contravariance breaks things.
Like on a delegate, I just don't see how it would. Yeah, like it already arguments already have to be like contravariant effectively. So whatever.
Well, I think if you don't say in, then it won't it won't say the delegate binds if you have any variance in the arguments.
No, I mean.
So it's about implicit binding of the delegate to of the method target to the delegate type.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's about that. It's about like assigning a method group or something to a delegate type. So it does affect that, but it should only make it more liberal. So
yeah,
it'll be good.
And then based on action taking the things as in, I think we want in, because this is the weird, like, to bind as an event correctly, you're going to be past things of the weakest type. So binding to a function that wants a stronger type is not right, but
right.
Action
it's
used
fine
in.
If you want to take an object of object, right? If your handler can do an object for both arguments, then
yeah.
Great.
So I think in means it'll bind to a weaker type than the delegate specifies, and out would be can go to a derived type from what the thing specifies. Of course.
So with the ref struct thingy, how does that affect like action of object or whatever being assigned to this? Is that fine?
It says it allows ref struct. It doesn't compel a ref struct. It would just care about the particular T's in the end.
Right.
I think the in just doesn't do anything when you construct it over a struct.
I guess what I'm wondering is like in that assignment, right? Like in theory, you can assign like because of the contravariance an action of object to object, and then you call it with a ref struct. Like how that's an error, right? Like because you can't box it.
Yeah.
So like how does that surface? Is that like a runtime error when you try to do the assignment?
If you tried to call, if you had a foo of object and you tried to call it with a ref struct, it would fail at compile time and runtime.
Well, that's kind of the point, though, right? So, like, what we want to happen is if I have an action of object to object, because of the contravariance, I should be able to assign that to an event handler of any T's almost, right? I guess not.
You can't assign it to an event handler.
Yeah, yeah, you know that in compile time. Yeah, you're right. I just didn't think it all the way through. Okay. Sorry.
Is the keyword allow or allows?
Allows with an S, sadly.
VS Code thinks that neither are a keyword, so I had to check. And Steve wants to change the existing one.
It'll probably help no one other than us when we see a disconnect in the APIs. We're like, why do we have a disconnect in the APIs?
I'm sure some tanners of the world out there will eventually use the ref struct allow constraint at some point.
Just in the last release.
No, he'll use action, which probably already allows ref struct, I would assume.
Last release we added it to all the actions and funcs.
Yeah.
It's completely conceivable, for example, that you might want to have an event where the args is a span, for example.
Yeah. I see it. And it should work, so it makes sense.
All right, so I think we want to change event handler of t event args to in t event args, and make t event args be allows ref struct, and then so the new one is in of to sender and in of to t event args, and allows ref struct in both positions.
Ship it.
All right. And I even wrote down contravariant instead of covariant. Good job, me. All right, and I will take a note of guideline update. Okay, I think that leaves us with one red item. Steve Harder, are you still with us?
I can talk about this. Okay, so last on this API, which you're basically trying to allow inherited keyed service dependencies, where you basically get a service from the same key as the current service. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone here, and because we kind of went over this in an earlier meeting. So originally there was like we were proposing basically a new attribute. The from keyed services attribute already exists, but it basically requires you to specify a static key. And then the other proposal was for you to basically just request a service in general, like to tell to the whatever framework's constructing your object or whatever that this parameter is supposed to be a service and not deserialized from, say, a JSON payload from like a request body or something. Anyway, but we're like, could we merge all of these concepts into a single attribute that already exists? And we were going to do that with basically overloading the object key. So like null would mean a non-keyed service, and then there was going to be like a specific kind of static new object, which represented inheriting the key, right? I think we approved just making that static object public, but maybe I'm wrong. The issue there might have been that static object was never public, which would make it harder for third party. I think this is still in PR for like third party containers, IFC containers to implement. This I do like. Basically creates an enum, makes it more explicit, gives us place to document better, like the lookup mode to be those three things, right? Either no key, so not keyed at all. Explicit key is, I think, pretty explanatory. An inherit key, yeah. So I would approve it, but
What would lookup mode none mean? Or sorry,
No
no
key?
key? Yeah.
Yeah, it's different than none. It basically, all right, let's look at the API usage, because so there is an argument. Okay, maybe better would be to have a second attribute for this null scenario. I could be convinced, honestly, pretty easily probably. But so that's what none would be, is that first usage would be from keyed service null. That would set this to none, which basically means that you don't want to get a keyed service. It's basically MVCs from services. Just means that, hey, this isn't like a JSON body. This is like supposed to come from a service.
Sorry, just the reason I was pushing. I opened the issue actually initially for the null thing, and the reason for it is every other keyed service related API we have allows the key to be null, and it means non-keyed, except for the attribute.
That's a fair point. And yeah, I actually regret that we did that for the other APIs. But you're right. Like, now that we've done that, it does make a lot more sense to allow it here. And it's logical and it's consistent with like get keyed service, which is like, yeah, the typical API for getting a keyed service. So I think it's good from that perspective. It might also be good to have another attribute for people to like, right? Because like, why are we talking about keyed service when I don't have any keyed services in my container, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do this. So we could approve this and then discuss the other attribute later too.
So is the only consumption model of this expected to be reflection?
Yeah, we've experimented in the past about like source generating IOC containers. It usually doesn't work just because of the way DI works, which is that you could be constructing internal classes in other assemblies when they add their service descriptors to your service collection. So yeah, because of the way iService descriptors work and the whole shebang, then yeah, you are relying on a certain amount of reflection.
Okay, because you're adding the property as helping somebody understand what was passed in the constructor, but anything doing IL-based analysis, or I guess metadata-based analysis, all that they see is that you called which constructor you called and what you passed to it. So that means,
which, to be fair,
they would have to encode the same things.
Yeah, you do have to encode the same things, but it is completely based on constructor parameters, even if a little awkward.
Okay. So I guess really it's two things. One, the ordering and service key lookup mode of should the no/null key be the 0 value, and then if the is no key the right answer if it really means from the null key or unkeyed or whatever. No key just seems weird. But I guess it matches the suffix that everything ends with key. So
yeah, I don't mind it ending with key. Null key almost seems a little redundant because it is null and in the inherited case as well. Yeah, the other thing like we could consider is like, yeah, I think it's fine. Is like, yeah, do we think no parameters is like a strong enough indication that you're inheriting the key? And I think that it is. Like, you're saying it's from keyed service, like what other key would it be at that point? I suppose none, but yeah, I think the fact that you say from keyed services, it should probably be some key. The only key that would make sense that you gotta pick would be the current one. Anyway, so yeah, I'm happy, like I said, with it being as proposed. I don't like null key, but maybe I could be convinced for some other replacement for no key.
I just like, do you use the idea in documentation or anything that null to get keyed services gets the one with no key, like, Or are
Let's look at get keyed services, the doc comments. I'm sure, I hope we say something about the null case or get keyed service. I'm looking it up on my computer too. Doesn't say anything about null. Okay, well, we should work on that. Do you have any preference, Steve? I just don't like null key. I'm okay with no key, but
For the enum name?
yeah, for the first.
I think no key is ambiguous between the two constructors. Null key is not.
Okay.
But I'm fine with either. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer null because it's the word that you wrote here to get it.
All right.
And it's
All
it's the value you would pass to get keyed service to, or this is saying I'm going to call get keyed service with null. So.
All right. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm okay with it. It's pretty clear in the context of the three things what that means. So.
Okay, and then the so everybody happy with service key lookup mode as the enum and lookup mode as the property?
Yeah, I think so. Is it okay if we put like inherit key as in the first position? I know it shouldn't really matter, but since it's like the default constructor.
Because I asked which one you want to be 0. So.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I missed that. But I would prefer inherit to be 0. The other two I don't care about as much. Probably make null key last. It's not that important.
Okay, and I added a note that the property being get only is correct because it's calculated value instead of a tunable parameter. This because typically a get property on an attribute means it was a constructor parameter, and if it's not a constructor parameter, it should be a set attribute. But this one is a calculated value. So. Okay, so now we look like that. I didn't actually write that change down here. No key became null key, and inherit key floats up to the 0 value. So it's inherit, then null, then explicit, which is interesting because it means the only thing it did in the previous version is now the furthest from 0 of defined things, but doesn't matter. And lookup mode get only is correct. Any other notes? Do we still have people? We still have people. And anything from chat? Chat asked about default, but I think we want to be clear as to what the default is. So, well, actually, there is no default because it's the default constructor is the inherit key behavior, and we don't just want to call it default because nobody would know what that meant. So, if it was an input parameter, default would make sense, but this is a behavior description parameter or enum. So, all right.
Out only. All right, looks good to me.
All right. So next week is the Microsoft Build Conference. Too many people are going to be busy because of that, so there is no meeting next week. I'll send out a cancellation notice for people who have the calendars, and I'll delete it from the public calendar. And then the week after, I won't be here. If someone else can run the meeting, then there will be a meeting, and if there isn't, then there won't be. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you well, either they'll see you in 2 weeks, and no matter what, I'll see you in 3. And until then, ciao. Oh, same .NET time, same .NET channel. Yeah, I have a catchphrase. I should use it. Ciao.